Okay, here on example 2, we're going to be taking a look at how do we find the product of pure imaginary numbers. So if we have two imaginary numbers being multiplied, how do we figure out what their product is? It's one of our examples of how we're going to be working with these numbers in the same way we work with normal numbers. We want to be able to multiply, divide, add, subtract. In this case, we're looking at multiplying. How do we find the product of these two? Well, to find the product, the process is similar to before. We're going to factor out a part of this radicand. We're going to factor out that square root of -1, which is the value I. So in this case, we have I times square root of 10, and this one would factor to I square root of 15. Once we have this, we'll multiply the parts that are like terms. So these imaginary terms, I and I, multiply to make I squared. And square root of 10 multiplies the square root of 15 to make square root of 150. Just the opposite of that process we did before, where we broke up a radical into two smaller ones. In this case, we're going to multiply these two radicals together to get a single larger radical. This single larger radical then gets broken down into a perfect square that can be simplified to 5. Our -1 just becomes a negative sign for simplicity. And our final answer for the product of two imaginary numbers is one real number, one negative real number. Okay, so down here we have a question that says, how can an expression with two imaginary expressions, -10 and -15, have a product that is real? Well, the way that works is that they both have that imaginary unit that can be factored out. So if we can factor out that imaginary unit from both, and we know that the imaginary unit squared takes us from the imaginary number system back into the real number system, we can see that two imaginary numbers will multiply to give you a real number. And to be specific, it will always give you a negative real number, because imaginary numbers are the roots, are the factors of negative numbers. Okay. So we're going to go through and we're going to try one more here. So we want to simplify -16, square root of -16 times square root of -25. Well, like I said before, that first step is to pull those i's out. So we'd have I times the square root of 16 times I times the square root of 25. Okay, on this one, I'm going to handle this slightly differently. The i's will once again come together to make -1, but rather than putting these two together, I can see that we've already got perfect squares here. Square root of 16 will be 4, square root of 25 will be 5, and our final solution would therefore be -20.